Come on, Graham.
Yeah, it wasn't about the invisible college. What was
It's
the
all right,
book,
man. I
Ronnie?
gotcha. It's American Metaphysical Religion.
American. That's right, 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 right. Yeah, yeah. And this one, we'll talk about the unobstructive way, which is after death, and then the Rosicrucian counterculture, the origins and influence of the invisible society. I mean, that's the one we thought we'd be talking about. I was listening to it. It's pretty interesting read. It kind of gave me a different vision, which I'm sure it was supposed to do of history, from a more sort of
Hmm.
esoteric angle. All the major like religious and political battles and stuff in Europe, I guess during the Renaissance, but more from an esoteric angle. So did you, when you were writing that book, did you come across anything surprising to you, or did you learn anything about Rosicrucianism that you sort of didn't know?
Yeah, a lot. It was, I'd studied that with Manly Hall when I worked for him because I was working on his alchemical bibliography, which was mostly Rosicrucian books and manuscripts. And he had a particular viewpoint of it that was based on, early 20th century, maybe even a little bit of 19th century scholarship. And then around 2000, academia finally woke up and realized that it was worthwhile to study these things. And they opened up archives that had never been touched before. And so all this new information came out. And I found myself wishing that I could go into his office and say, look at this. This is
Oh yeah.
amazing. It changes the whole picture, So
Yeah.
the book is filled with surprises.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the main things that he wouldn't have realized?
Well, for one thing, kind of people settled into this idea that the people behind the Rosicrucian manifestos, which started the whole thing, were some kind of adepts. They were maybe even ascended masters, if you're looking at it from a kind of pseudo theosophical point of view. And they were at least very serious scholar monks and such. But it looks like that's not the case. It looks like they were college students, really, and especially Andre, who was about 18 years old at the time. And it seems like this group of college students that were reading forbidden books, like books by Bruno, who had just been burned at the stake by the Vatican about 10 years earlier. They were reading him, they were reading Agrippa, they were reading Ficino, all this stuff that was considered really kind of fringe. And they had professors who also loved this stuff. And together, they concocted this first manifesto, which was not meant to be published. It was a manuscript that was circulating amongst like-minded people, and it had a lot of revolutionary ideas in it, not the least of which was that the idea of sharing knowledge that it kind of tried to present was not hierarchical. Like, it wasn't, you have to earn each degree like a priest going up in the church, and you had to be kind of special and sanctioned by a particular institution. It was really more about, are you asking the right questions? Are you really curious about nature and the secrets that are hidden in nature? Do you see the world the way we see it? So instead of going up and down, it was kind of going sideways. And that was revolutionary for the period. And so it looks like this was really comparable to something like Allen Ginsberg's Howl, or if you go up into the punk world of the 90s, like zines. It was a small collective of people who were very forward looking, and they were radical. They had a completely different viewpoint. That's why, I mean, applying the word counterculture to them is considered a little odd because the word was invented in the 1960s to describe the hippies rejecting the political world. But to me, it matches because the Rosicrucians were, for example, they were pro-science. They believed that by doing experiments and researching nature, that God had put secrets there that would improve human life, that would help us to heal ourselves, and would in many different ways improve society. Whereas the Vatican was busy killing people who were trying to begin this new world of science. They also had this other viewpoint that there was a more direct communion with the divine possible for somebody, that you didn't have to just do what everybody else did, go to the confessional, do what the priest says, and everything is just the way it's supposed to be. And for God's sake, don't pay attention to anything else because all the other religions are wrong. Like, the Rosicrucians had a great respect for even the pagan religions and the wisdom that was buried there. And so they presented a much more, to us, modern viewpoint, a viewpoint that even included, to a degree, freedom of religion
Yeah.
and interest in, like, what the Jews have the Kabbalah. We want to know about that. We want to know, Islam has Sufism. We want to know about that. And that was so different in the church. So it was considered very radical. And when the manifesto came out, it was hugely controversial. Like, it created a storm in Europe. All of a sudden, all these books and pamphlets were published by people saying, "This is the best thing I've ever heard of. I agree with them." By people saying, "This is the devil." They call them the devil's Jesuits, for example. And this is all heresy and lies. And then there were many people, maybe the majority, and especially in the beginning, who were saying, "Hey, I want to be part of the order. So I'm publishing this book to let you know how qualified I am to be with you." And, uh, and it's also interesting that there's a shocked reaction from the people behind it, because that's not what they wanted. When they were talking about universal reformation, they were aware that that had to happen individually, like that each person had to have their own reformation, and then they would provide an example. But people weren't taking it that way. They were taking it as, there's going to be this sudden huge change in the world and we're all going to advance, and that's not what they meant, and they certainly didn't wanna create that kind of controversy. So a year later, they come out with another one. The first one was called the Fama, and then they come out with another manifesto called the Confessio, and in it, they're pretty bold about how they feel about this. Like, at one point, the the author even says that it makes him feel like vomiting when he sees how people have responded to the Fama, and that they're trying to correct it. They're trying to say, "Look, I'm gonna try this again, okay?" And it's interesting too because in the Confessio, there's this amazing description that's been completely misinterpreted. It's amazing how they were completely misinterpreted. Um, so it says, "Hey, what would it be like if you could actually know that you have existed since the beginning of time, before time? What would it be like to know that you will be existing at the end of time, anyway, beyond time? And what would it be like to know everything that's happening everywhere? So in a sense, to be beyond time and space." Now, this was taken very literally by people. That's why they thought that these were ascended masters, human beings that achieved some kind of superhuman state. But that description is actually found in the spiritual traditions of the East and the West. It's a description of what the core human soul is like, that deep within us, our origin of our consciousness is outside time and space, and that we sojourn here in order to learn in this obstructed world where we become very blinded to that fact. And so if you follow, for instance, the Chinese alchemical tradition of the secret of the golden flower, you're being taught the same thing, that if you do these meditations, you will achieve the consciousness that you will have after death, which is outside time, outside space, where all time and space is available to you. You can find this in Plato as well. That's what Plato meant when he said that philosophy was preparation for death. It was achieving that consciousness, but that wasn't the way people took it. They meant, "Oh, well, that means that they're superhuman." Even the idea of calling themselves the invisible society, right, made people think they've got powers of invisibility. Well, they were invisible because if they
They
weren't, they'd
had
be
to be.
killed.
Right. That's what I wanted to bring up right away was the context on why they had to be a secret society because I mean, we're going through the witch trials around that time. So what was the time
Mhm.
period again when those 2 books came out?
The first one is in 1614, the second one's
1614,
in
yeah.
1615.
Right.
There's another one in 1616 called The Chemical Wedding, and at this point, they kinda have given up on convincing anybody, and it's has a strongly satirical element. In the first book, Father CRC is very noble. He's this monk who went to the East, and he got all this knowledge, and he tried to bring it back to Europe, but the Europeans scoffed at him because they didn't wanna lose their prestige, and so he found a few brothers, and together they created the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, and he's very noble. But by the time of the chemical wedding, just a couple years later, he's portrayed as this old man who's struggling through these circumstances. There's almost a comedic quality to it. There's even a point where this woman who guides him turns around to the reader, very unusual for those days, breaks the fourth wall, and it kind of winks at us and says, "Hey, do you think he'd cheer up if I slept with him?" And this was radical, like, pornography for those days. And it's very much the product of these British musical comedy troupes that would tour through Germany, because in Germany, theater wasn't allowed. The Protestants were very strict, and they weren't laughing and having winks about stuff, about sex, but the British were. And so Andre, we know, saw British comedy as they toured through Germany, and it obviously influenced this writing. And then 1 year later, he writes the first book under his own name, which is called Menippus. And this is a hilarious book, because basically what he's doing is he's giving you a catalog of all the idiots and hustlers who ruined the Rosicrucian dream, who misunderstood it. And so he's got a character named Fama, appropriately enough, who is obsessed with fame. And he's got characters like Socrates and Alexander in there who represent other ways of not getting it. And my favorites, though, are as somebody who was in a variety of scenes like anarcho punk and riot girl and others, he lists people that I recognized immediately. And I just thought, wow, they're still here. He understands. And like, one was the art connoisseur. Another one was the person who's trying to make money out of it. Another one is what he called the scholar of the vanities, who has to know every single detail about every single thing. And these are the people that come into scenes and wreck them, really, because they spoil the innocence. And so he's talking about that.
It seems very similar to the genesis of the Templars with that one of the early Templars going to the east and bringing back all this knowledge and building the cathedrals with it. Like, seems coincidental that it would be the same as that, very similar.
A lot of knowledge was preserved in the East. That's where Plato and the hymns of Orpheus and a lot of magical writing was preserved in Islam. They had more respect for the esoteric stuff than there was in the West. So, for instance, the amazing discovery and return to Europe of knowledge of Plato and Orpheus and Aristotle came from manuscripts that were acquired by the de Medicis in the East, which Ficino translated. And then also you've got Sufism, and the Sufi interest in the rose is highly suggestive of influence with the not just the Rosicrucians in a way, but also with the Protestants. Because if you think about it, there's similarities there. Like, both the Protestants and Islam said that you shouldn't have depictions of God, you shouldn't have idols. And that is something that the Rosicrucians and the Protestants criticized the Roman Catholic Church about. And they also have this sense of, although they have hierarchies, the individual person is responsible for their salvation on a level. For their relationship with the divine. And so their imams, their priests, are a little more like friends, like people who have studied this stuff, and so they're helping you. Whereas in the Catholic Church, the priests and then higher up the hierarchy had absolute authority. And also, the Catholic Church had something that was, up till now, the greatest surveillance state in history, which was the confessional, because you had to go confess, otherwise you were going to hell. And there was a law that the priests had to, if there was something told in confessional, even though you were told, no, they'll never say anything to anybody, but if you said something that a priest thought might be important to the local church or to the Vatican for that matter, it went up. And it could go all the way to the Pope, what those secret things said in the confessional. So they had every week, every Sunday, they were getting like new information about what was going on everywhere. And the nobles even had like maids and people working for them who were just simple people who overheard things and who knew what was going on, and so they would report this stuff to the priests even when perhaps the nobles didn't want it to be reported. So this was a huge surveillance state that was supported by the Inquisition, which would torture and kill people. And have to remind people, for example, that a good example is this poor bookseller. Somebody approached him and said, "Hey, I heard about this book by Agrippa called Three Books of Occult Philosophy. Can you get me a copy?" And he was like, "Well, that's a forbidden book, but I think I can." Well, he got caught and he was executed for it. They threw him
Wow.
into a river and drowned him for selling a book to somebody. So it was a very dangerous time to have ideas like this.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it seems to me like they were, propagating the ideas of not so much a one world religion, but that all religions could get along or that they could all work together and that we should have freedom of expression and all these freedoms that that you guys are supposed to have in the States now. Um, and
Ha ha ha.
when did it kind of formalize into a group? Because it is a modern organization. I mean, I know people in it.
Yes,
It and it
it has a weird history.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you don't have to
It
get into the whole history, but was there a time when it turned from satirical kind of like weird start to like formalizing itself?
it was organized in many different ways, like, so maybe you could say, for instance, one example would be this great philosopher of education, Comenius, and he had the idea that Andre was behind all this. He was smart enough to surmise that. And so he wrote a letter to Andre and he said, "I think you are behind the Rosicrucians and I'd like to be involved in this. I like your ideas." And Andre wrote him back and said, "It's not really an organization. It's just a group of friends." And he called it a ludibrium, which is Latin for a joke or a hoax. And but Comenius said, "Well, I still like the ideas, so I'm going to apply them in my own work." And he came up with some really radical ideas. Like he wanted all women to be taught how to write and how to read. He wanted all indigenous people of all continents to be taught how to read and write. He wanted the creation of a language that everyone could speak so that there would be your own language, but you could speak to anybody in the world. He wanted to start something called the College of Light, where all the most brilliant minds from all the cultures in the world would be brought together in order to work to improve humanity, to come up with inventions and to come up with medicines.
Like
And
encyclopedias almost.
and that too, yeah, they talked about the Rosicrucians talked about the book M. Some people said it was the book Mundi, the book of the world. But in this book would be all the information in the whole world. And they talked about the invisible college, which is similar to the internet in a way, because it was a college that would be everywhere and nowhere
But I
that
think what
anybody could consult.
but I think what that these are great examples because and what I seem to get I how do I explain this or say this? But they're kind of getting a bad rap these days, right? I mean, even this college professor guy, this professor op guy that Darren and I have been talking about on the show, Professor Jang is calling out like secret societies like the Rosicrucians and blaming all these things on them. And from what I've learned and read and the stuff that you were just mentioning, like it doesn't seem like they're saying that in a context of like, oh, we have to take over the world and do whatever it takes to bring
Mm-mm.
this world under one. It's just it's just ideas of like how to get everybody up to speed so that we can sort of have a more educated, better society. In my opinion, it seems like that, but it seems like they're
Mhm.
getting a bad rap. I mean, do you have any thoughts on how oh man, on how things are going for them in our culture
Well,
today?
how it
Or how they're
happened.
misrepresented, as far
Yeah,
as like
it
taking
is
over the
weird.
world?
I mean, but how it happened is that it did produce these strange interpretations. So, for example, on the one hand, when Sir Walter Raleigh was planning the first colonies in Virginia, he had a couple people involved who were very moved by Rosicrucian ideas. So, for instance, the treasurer was somebody who'd worked closely with Comenius. And the idea of freedom of religion was included in what they might be doing in the New World. But then on the other hand, you had Cromwell, who was moved by the Rosicrucian ideals, but he believed that the only way to achieve the Rosicrucian utopia was to kill a whole bunch of people and to kill off the Catholics, basically.
Right.
And so it turns into this violent dictatorship in the name of the Rosicrucians, which
Right.
the authors of the manifestos would have just been like, "What?" But also you had another movement called the Golden and Rosy Cross, and not all of them, but there were a couple of them who got to be the powers behind a throne, and they were as bad as the Vatican. They were practicing censorship, they were controlling people and controlling religion. So I think that this contributed to a bad reputation in
Yeah.
Europe for the Rosicrucians. Also, a lot of fraud. People saying that they met Rosicrucians when they hadn't, and declaring that they'd been
Pretend
empowered.
alchemists and stuff, and
Yeah, we started this Rosicrucian order, and it goes way back to Egypt, and really it's just some guy who decided to say this and started an order. Sometimes it was something beautiful, like, and there was a wonderful one called the Salon de Rose Croix that was, had people like Satie and Debussy, these great musicians and artists in France were members of it, and it was very inspiring. But there were other ones that sometimes had more radical ideas. And there's been a tendency all along to kind of clump them all together and say these are all Rosicrucians, and that's not true. There's a lot of disagreement. So, for example, they say that the Freemasons, who are also constantly demonized, are
yeah,
Rosicrucians.
yeah,
Well, as I've said, the Rosicrucians didn't like hierarchy, right? They wanted wisdom to be free and available to everyone. And but in Freemasonry, you've got a very strict hierarchy where you have to ascend up the degrees. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I mean, it's
yeah,
good
yeah, yeah,
to help people, so they don't misinterpret, but
yeah,
it's certainly not the Rosicrucian ideal to set it up like that. So were the Freemasons influenced by the Rosicrucians? Obviously. But did they, in some sense, enshrine Rosicrucian ideals? No, they had their own approach to it that in some ways completely contradicted it. And I think that, I mean, this is not a popular position, but my feeling is that human beings will do anything to avoid admitting that we are why shit gets crazy. Like, we are cruel. So you have archons, and you have demiurges, and you have demons, and you have Rosicrucians, and
Lucifer,
you have
Satan, and
Illuminati and reptilians, and anything but admitting that we suck, that we are cruel and selfish. And until we admit that, I think that it's going to be a hard, a hard slog. And I would also add that if you look at the animal that's closest to us in terms of DNA, the chimpanzee, they can be so horribly vicious and just awful to each other, and especially in terms of the politics of the pack. And like, do they have, egregores and chimp demons and chimp Rosicrucians who are making them do this stuff? No. So my feeling is that we make this stuff up to absolve ourselves, and we populate our subconscious with fear, with fearful apparitions that are projections of something that's truly human. The willingness to harm each other and to do whatever we, let's say, call it the will to power, as Nietzsche called it.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Darren, do you have
Well, it
anything?
seems to me like the Rosicrucians, I mean, they seem to be the ones I hear about the least, at least when it comes to from a demonization standpoint. So I hear a lot about the Freemasons, a
Mhm.
little less about the Templars, but they still get mixed in there because, of course, they're tied into the Crusade and all that sort of
Mhm.
violence a little bit. But the Rosicrucians just always seem to me like the ones that weren't really up to no good. I'm not saying the other ones were up to no good, but I'm just talking about from like a pop culture standpoint.
Well,
I never
they were
see
certainly
posts
less
on X that
powerful,
say these
right?
fucking
They
Rosicrucians are ruining the world, you know?
Yeah, they weren't in for the most part, they weren't in positions of power. They didn't have armies at their disposal, the way the Templars were a warrior cult. They were not yeah, they weren't like that. But then again, look, I mean, my mentor, Manly Hall, is demonized all over the internet, as
Yeah,
this
yeah,
reptilian, Illuminati. And I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
only knew him during the 7 years during the last decade of his life. He was the most wise, decent, wholesome,
Funny,
generous human being I ever met.
funny.
And yeah, funny, exactly, and caring, and I mean, he took me, I mean, up until that point in my life, I had been saved by the woman who became my wife, who had asked me to protect her in a dangerous situation, and I rescued her, but she really rescued me. Before that, I was a criminal. I was violent. I had a band that it used to say on all of our guest lists, anyone wearing the colors of the devil's henchmen or the Satan's slaves, who were I liked them like they had a code of honor that seemed to me was lacking from most of the world, but there was a lot of bad things going on. I was involved in a lot of really bad things, and I thought I was stupid and venal, and Manly Hall saw in me something that I didn't know I was, that I had a great intellect, that I could be compassionate, that with his guidance I could turn into a scholar. I mean, amazing to give a person like that a chance,
Yeah.
just some guy off the street, and bring him into his life. We became friends with him and his wife, Marie. And so the person that I knew was a beautiful human being. And when I read about how horrible he was, I'm just, again, I just think that people have this desire to create these specters that this is why everything sucks.
Yeah, no, that's kinda what I
And,
was getting at, yeah, it's like a that's a good microcosm of what I mean with the whole thing, like, they just throw Freemasonry and the Rosicrucians together, and, which I'm sure there's a lot of wisdom that is overlaps between those
yes.
societies too. I mean, there's a lot of natural science and natural wisdom that probably
Hmm.
fits into both of those, but and then the Illuminati, I mean, it all just gets thrown around now, especially with the internet and,
Hmm.
um Darren, do you wanna
Well,
say something
Well,
else?
Manly always seemed like from my, um, albeit probably fairly ignorant assumptions, it just seems like he was always more of a student of philosophy, and he was always more about learning it and sort of reporting on it than maybe a guru of philosophy. So he was like, I don't know. I mean, he's definitely one of the most important figures in the last 100 years when it comes to that world. I mean, the secret teachings of all ages got to be, one of the most important. But it's so much stuff sort of comes out of that thing in an age before the internet, where if he doesn't write that book, who knows how much of that shit we're even still talking about today.
that's why he wrote it, was to make sure that it survived for us. And he also had this, like, one of the things that was infectious for me and also for my wife Tamara was his passion for culture. Like, he loved history, he loved culture, he loved all the spiritual paths, he loved art and literature, and he wanted to know about every culture. He had respect for everybody. And it was beautiful. I mean, this man was in his 80s and he'd find out some new piece of information about Japanese Buddhism and he'd be excited like a kid. And that really is catching. I'm the same way. I love finding out about everything. And then you contrast that with religions that teach you that we're right, everybody else is wrong.
Yeah,
And wrong means evil.
yeah.
And so all this information that's on the internet, here's the difference, right? So right now we have this amazing world where pretty much every spiritual tradition and artistic and cultural tradition that ever existed is online. Books that were only available in a couple of places. I mean, there were books that I handled at PRS Library that there might have been one other place in the world where you could see that book. But
Wow.
today, anybody can find it on the internet, on Internet Archive or other places. All the rarest books are there. And it's this incredible resource for finding out what people have believed throughout human history. And it's exciting to me. I want to
Oh,
know
yeah.
all of it. But
Well,
then go ahead.
no, no, keep going, but then
I was just gonna say, but then others are taught, well, actually, all that other information is just Satan, like, trying to
yes,
fool you. Like,
yes.
people who say the Greek gods are just demons who are pretending to be the gods. And I'm like, "Really? Well, you should get a hard look at Jehovah because in history, he's doing a lot more harm than the Greek gods ever did." It's like this And when you do that, you're alienating your own cultural heritage, your own
Yeah.
legacy, your own
Yeah.
humanity.
Well, it even goes into more of current stuff like the Rosicrucians or like theosophy, blaming theosophy for the UN, one world religion, and all that. And it's like that doesn't just because somebody came out of theosophy and went to the UN in a spiritual sense doesn't mean that that's that you should tar theosophy with that brush. It's just that's
Yeah.
the way I look at it. But that
Yeah.
leads me to one of my questions because now that it's
Mhm.
out there and it's online and people that are interested have pathways to find information, is that one of the reasons why the Templars right now, do you think that they're coming out with they're disclosing a lot of this information, like some of the treasures that they've kept hidden, and the Rosicrucians seem to be bringing stuff out. Even the some of the Masons that we know, the Freemasons we know, like Ronald Carlson and stuff, like they're really trying to get this esoteric information out there. There seems to be like
And the
uh
Templars, you could include them in that as
yeah,
well.
that's with that stuff. Do you think that there's a purposeful thing in these societies now to that whether we're ready or not, it's coming out, so they might as well get ahead of it?
I think that it's because there's the perception of crisis in human civilization. And so the feeling is it's a couple of things. One, we're not in the kind of danger that we were in before. We're not going to have the Vatican come sweeping down and take us away and kill us because we're talking about this stuff. We don't have to be secret. And then also, if you're going to complain about what's going on in the world, but you're hiding the secrets that help people become better human beings, it doesn't really much make sense, right? So you want to get that information to people so that they can improve themselves. They can kind of build their own relationship with their souls and live more soulful lives. And about the one religion thing, it's also so much of this is misunderstanding because the idea was never to create a religion and then force it on everybody. The
Exactly.
concept from theosophy is that all religions are one religion,
Yes.
that it's the same secret is hidden in all the religions. So
Yes.
let's have a way of reminding people that there aren't giant differences, and it isn't that all other religions are satanic or something like that. It's that there are accidents of time and place that have cloaked these secrets in different ways. And so they try to remind people, look, this is all the same. This is all about you discovering who you are and what you are and the meaning of the soul and the experience of the soul.
Yeah, which is just also pushing back from the materialistic paradigm, which is,
Yes.
which to me is led us down a more destructive path than if we all acknowledge this metaphysical reality.
I think so, and also I think that the irony is, I mean, when working on this Rosicrucian book, and especially now that it came out with the timing, in America right now, we're dealing with this Christian nationalist movement, and there's a lot of Catholics in it. A lot of this is Opus Dei. That this is like a sort of pseudo Jesuit organization that doesn't really agree with the Pope in terms of how Catholicism should comport itself, and they're doing the same things. They're trying to do the same things that the Rosicrucians were fighting in 1600. Everybody else is Satan. Women should be at home taking care of the babies and shouldn't have any vote. And minorities should be enslaved essentially. And I mean, that is the church in 1600. And so it's so ironic to see this happening again. And so there would be an impulse among those who are aware of the Rosicrucians and of these other sources of this wisdom, which is really the Western esoteric tradition, right? It's whether they try to say, well, it's from Egypt and it came up to Greece, and they think people think it was like this organization that was hidden the whole time, and it was filled with rich elitists controlling the world. No, the ideas inspired others. So the Egyptian ideas inspired the great Greek philosophers, and the Greek philosophers inspired the Florentine Renaissance, and so on. And so this isn't some kind of like thing that was hidden from all of us that these people believed in order to dominate us.
Yeah.
This was a tradition that was persecuted all the way through history, and the essence of the tradition was basically what Ralph Waldo Emerson would say in his essay Nature. Why should we have to, you know, practice the revelations of 1,000, 2,000 years ago? Why can't we have revelations? Why can't God talk to us?
I
Yeah,
want
I
to go to the
like it.
chats quick. Here we got one from our friend of the show, Brad. We met him in BC before, but I think I could show. Oh no,
Oh
it won't
yeah, there he
show.
is. Yeah, that's the one that's the guy I was talking about.
It won't show the whole thing. So
I
I'll
can
just.
well, I can see most of it, but
I don't think. Anyway, I can read it. I'm a Rosicrucian. I've never met another. I get monthly packages to study. I'm supposed to go to a temple in Vancouver and do my initiations, but I don't. I don't practice or study nearly as much as I should. But my life has changed 1000% for the better since set on this path. My Rosicrucian learning has taught me, if anything, my intentions and actions are the most important thing. Any egregore is powerful as you want it to be. This is an individual path for sure. You learn Jedi stuff, but you can't use it for yourself. If you stick to that, you will succeed beyond what you can imagine. I was a hard living underground miner for 20 years. Once I started this path, within 2 years, I was retired from mining and starting a homestead and living my dream. It's literally a choose your own adventure in a way of you are truly trying to live a life of service.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's to think of the fact that, you know, eventually in America and also in England, there were these Rosicrucian public orders established. Back in the day, you used to get ads for them in the back of like magazines.
yeah.
And yes, they do have a lot of Rosicrucian ideas in them, and they are schools of Western esotericism. And I think that's a beautiful description. It is about a life of service. It's about also the magic of life. And I don't mean that in like, you know, I mean, I practiced chaos magic when I was a kid. I'm not putting it down, but it isn't about manifesting your new car or a girlfriend or something like that. It's about when you live at a certain elevation, life like collaborates with you and
Yeah.
like magical things happen. My life with my amazing wife Tamara was just amazingly magical. I mean, just the synchronicities that occurred, the adventures that we had, the people that we met. It was something that is like you dream about. And it's because of this open-mindedness, this open-heartedness, this trust in nature. Like Manly Hall said at the beginning of the Secret Teachings of All Ages, he dedicated it to the rational soul of the world. And when I ran into that as a kid, when I was a criminal and I thought, oh, you know, the world is a jungle and it's the human beings are the worst thing in the world and life is meaningless, it blew my mind, you know, like just to think about that. Like somebody believes that there's a rational soul in the world, like that I can communicate with and it can help lead me. Or as Manly Hall often said to people who tried to get him to be a guru, which he refused to do, he would say, nature is your teacher. Your own life is your teacher. If you just pay attention the right way, nature and life will lead you to all the wisdom you could want.
I like it. I want to circle back quickly just for one thing. I don't think we can lump all of like the Christian nationalist thing together, like anti-feminists and people that think minorities should be slaves, and the Christian nationalists that think that they should be doing whatever this Opus Dei stuff. I mean, some of that is the pendulum swung a little hard, and there's a reaction happening,
Mhm.
but I don't think that can be just lumped into all like one sort of Christian
I think that's true, and
nationalist
I'm
movement.
not talking about the people. I'm talking about the like something like Opus Dei or the Heritage Foundation, which has been devoted, which is by the way very connected to Opus Dei, that has been working on this plan for a long time, and it's based in biblical ideas.
Mm,
Or like Hegseth's guru, you know, the preacher. I mean, these guys are classic uh, in this made cut from the same cloth as the Catholics of 1600.
yeah,
But there
that's
are
crazy.
many just people,
Yeah,
Americans, who are upset about where the world went and wanted a change. They were tired of neoliberalism and you know, and that's I'm not talking about
well,
them. I'm
yeah,
talking about
that's a good point, yeah, well
yeah.
put, yeah.
What about someone like Ayn Rand, who kind of gets roped into that whole side of things. But when you read her work, she's sort of talking about the same sort of radical individualism is the best way to help others, help the world. It's sort of that's my outlook on her work is that the more authentic and radically individual you can be and the more rights we give to those persons, the more beautiful the world can become and the more abundance that it'll produce. Now
I
she
agree
gets
with you.
thrown in by a bunch of people like I won't name names, but a bunch of my buddies who think she's, the capitalist fucking pig and all this other stuff. But when I read her, that's not what I get. I get this sort of anti-collective. It seems to align with this Rosicrucian stuff.
I think that a lot of that is because of context. People have to take into consideration when she was writing and what she was reacting against. And so there was a smothering kind of conformist movement in America at the time she's writing, where it was hard for somebody to be an individual. It was hard for somebody to chase after a dream. You were supposed to do your job and not complain and be a good American man. It was a very like this is how you do it. And she was saying that you need nonconformity. You need to be able to pursue your dream. You need to do things that others might disagree with or even find radical if that's what your genius leads you to. And now here we are on the other side of like, a revolution. I mean, just one example, and it's kind of a silly one, but look at the rock and roll revolution that lasted several decades, where it was all individuality, and you could go out there and reinvent yourself. I mean, I did. That this is when I hear about kids that like go out and shoot up schools, I think that's me. Like if I didn't get a band, it was a place that when you were just being smothered by parents and teachers and peer pressure to be a certain way, and it was like a certain rule, like jocks are great, and you don't be too intellectual, and you got to get married and do this. And you were like instead somebody who was a rebel, and you wanted to live an adventure, and you wanted to try drugs or whatever, and you were into literature and art, where you could just go reinvent yourself and find a bunch of people like yourself and have a life, and become successful even for many people. At one time, it was a thriving culture. People were making T-shirts, they were managers, they were roadies, I mean, I experienced that when I first started out in music. It's incredible. You have this idea. Mine was a bad idea. It was nihilist and racist, but nevertheless, you have an idea, and then people in the neighborhood go, "Wow, there's a band in the neighborhood," and musicians go, "I want to be in your band," and then other people go, "I'm your roadie," and then somebody suddenly books you a gig, and then you're on the radio, and they're making T-shirts for you. It's an amazing experience of reinvention and of freedom, and it gets you away from I got to go to church on Sunday. My parents don't approve of me wearing blue jeans, and that girl's a whore because she's already had one person. Like it freed you to have a completely different life. So we're looking at somebody like Rand from after all that, right? Where individualism like exploded, and so it's hard to see what she was talking about. But she was rebelling against the same things that William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg and Kerouac were rebelling against, that Jim Morrison was rebelling against. This smothering conformity of this is how you have to do it.
And from industry, it was after like the railroads were kind of getting nationalized and things were getting kind
Mhm,
of, bought up into one big sort of conglomerate where it seemed to be
mhm.
sort of
And she escaped the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
So
so she
she
saw what it
yeah,
could
she
be. I
saw
mean,
the
in the name of the good of the collective, they were completely neutering all individuality and creating this terrible kind of false culture that was trying to create an archetype of how everyone should act, and instead of allowing individuality to flourish.
You mentioned Jim Morrison. Have you looked into any of that Dave McGowan's work on Laurel Canyon and the dark heart of the hippie movement and how there's Jim Morrison. If you can start going through a bunch of these bands that come around when the Doors come out, and they like almost all of them have a direct family member, usually their father, that's part of naval or army intelligence. I mean, Jim Morrison's dad is the dude on the I forget the name of the boat now, but he's
Yeah,
basically the Gulf of Tonkin guy who says shit
yeah.
happened, I didn't.
Well, I think I have a couple things to say about that.
But you can
One,
see, so sorry to interrupt, but just to finish that
yeah,
thought, you can see both sides of it, right? You can see how yeah, their kids, easy gonna happen, but you can also see how B, they end up in the same place because of the way that the military system works, and they're because what we do see throughout history is that the younger generation always seems to push back against whatever's winning, right? Like when we were kids,
yeah,
we were all good little collectivists because that was sort of pushing back what was in power at the time. And now we're sort of in this more collective sort of avenue, it seems like in some ways. And then you've got
mhm,
my kids' generation coming up, and they're not having it again. They're like, fuck you guys.
exactly.
And this is crazy.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, one, if you're familiar with Morrison's work, if you really go into it, he hated his father. I mean, he hated him, and I think that it's not a surprise that the kids of the worst of the American intelligence, conformist power structure wound up being leaders in the hippie movement. They were intelligent and they were completely rejecting their parents and the world their parents were trying to foist on people.
That's a great point.
And then the other thing is I knew somebody actually, and here this is a beautiful example of how, so here's a nugget for the conspiracy theorists. So there was a guy named Arthur Johnson. He worked for Manly Hall. And he was the guy, all those great YouTube lectures of Manly Hall, he recorded them. And he also was sometimes Manly Hall's driver, meaning he had a crappy old Buick. And when Manly Hall needed a ride, he would give him a ride. And so he was a great mentor to me, Art. He was a great guitar player. He was a guitar player for Lena Horne. He was her musical director. He toured with Tim Buckley. He played he was so good. And he could play anything like lute, and he knew all the Renaissance music. And he was, I think, the first Silver Lake hipster, and a hilarious jazz guy, like that dry sense of humor that jazz guys have. And so he was part of the Laurel Canyon scene. He was hanging out with Stephen Stills and he was hanging out, with all those guys there and would always tell me stories about the parties that they would have and how amazing that scene was. And that they would just the jams that they would have at Stephen Still's house, for example, and how they were all talking about Nietzsche and about all these philosophical concepts, and they were all trying meditation, and they were all interested in the esoteric tradition, and they were exploring the world in this excited kind of new way. They were like, we're going to reinvent the world. Now, if you look at that from the outside, you can say, "Oh, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute." So, these guys were all kids of intelligence operatives, and Art Johnson's in the middle of it, and he's connected to Manly Hall. Well, there you go, But the reason that Art Johnson was telling me these things was to laugh at me. He would say, "Dude, you missed everything. You missed the hottest girls, the best drugs. I mean, our acid was so much better than anything you'll ever get. The cocaine was so pure it sparkled like rainbows." And he was like, everybody was so intellectual and so excited, and you could go down the street at sunset and see Jimi Hendrix at the fucking whiskey, you know. And he was saying, "I feel bad for you." And now I look at the world and I feel bad for the kids that are younger than me. I'm like, "Oh my God, well, at least I had the punk world and the drugs weren't quite as bad as they turned.
In the
It wasn't
80s
all
and
laced with
90s.
fentanyl." And so there's just been this kind of steady degradation. But I can tell you the excitement, and I've known other people like him who were part of that hippie movement. No, they're revolutionaries. They were trying to change the world, and they were deeply into, like, the Renaissance people, and they were excited about the idea of doing something, new, instead of having this ridiculous, we fight wars and we raise children and everything has to be by the book. They wanted to have adventures, and unfortunately, it fell apart, and a lot of the drugs that they thought were harmless turned out to be destructive for them, and they were eaten by the business, right? Because remember, the music business, when they were around, like Led Zeppelin. I mean, Peter Grant was, had a gun in his hand, when he was talking to the promoters. Okay, give me the money for the tickets and the T-shirts. They were inventing the business, but once like big business saw, damn, these hippies are making money, and there's a lot of girls around. They took over the whole thing and they smashed it.
When did it get smashed? Early
I think
90s?
you
Early
start to see
90s?
that in the 70s, I think. It
Oh,
starts to
even that
form
far
in the
back. Wow.
60s.
Yeah.
You get some suspicious situations like Jimi Hendrix dying the way he did, and his manager is like making all the money from that, and he was about to get rid of his manager. And then you really see it happen in the 70s where the rise of people like Geffen, and I'm not calling him out, I'm just saying they became the archetypal music business people. Now, Geffen was somebody that musicians trusted, but there were many of them, like Klein in the UK, that screwed the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, and the business side of it just took over. And then by the 80s, when you start to get into the hair bands, you've got musicians who don't even care. I mean, they're like, "Give me girls and drugs, and I'll do whatever you want," and they were looking for those kind of musicians. Look what happened to Cobain. I mean, Cobain was a throwback. He was somebody that was kind of revolutionary in a way, and he didn't make it. And I'm one of the
Well,
people
it's
who
starting to
thinks
look like
that
they
he
really killed him.
probably was helped along the way
Yeah, it
to
looks like,
uh,
I
to
mean,
leave this world.
have you seen the new evidence coming out where there's been some papers written that he was, I mean, I've
Mhm.
kinda had that take from day one,
Yeah, me
'cause he
too.
was seriously talking about quitting the business, so and I think that
Yeah.
a bunch of people in the band, I don't blame Chris so much, but I don't think Dave was down with it.
I'm not sure who's responsible, but I definitely think that there was. I mean, the first thing that came out of Geffen when they found out about his suicide was jam product into the pipeline, right? I mean, and I know we were like a half a step away from him. Like we had a lot of similar friends, and we were hearing a lot about him and Courtney. And I don't think he was suicidal. I think he was actually planning to break free of the life he was leading and to try a whole different approach. He was going to get no
Take some
Courtney,
money and run.
yeah, no Nirvana, and to make music the way he wanted to, and to explore the world. He had reasons to be excited about what was coming up next, but it would have been a disaster for Geffen, for Nirvana, for Courtney. Now who amongst those people? I don't know. And is it like direct? Is it like somebody blew his brains out, or is it that they just got around him and just, gave him so much pressure and shit that he couldn't take it because he was a very sensitive person. But after him, you kind of don't see it again, right? Like you don't really see the classic rock star that it's like they used to say about the Doors. Once you hear the Doors, dinner with your family is never the same again.
When were
And
you coming up through was it in the early 90s for you? Late 80s, early
yeah,
90s,
yeah,
or
yeah.
well, you
That
were
we were in a
right
Riot Girl band, so
right
so
around
we
that time.
were,
Okay.
yeah, and we had Tamara was friends with Danny Goldberg, who was Kurt's manager,
Okay.
and so we heard a lot of things about what was going on, and it was a really exciting time, man. It was revolutionary because
Yeah.
Kurt was supporting Rock for Choice, for example. We played a lot of Rock for Choice. There was a Rock Against Rape movement that they supported. There was a lot of, he was the guy that would come out and say, "Hey, man, I'm seeing the jocks that used to beat me up that are out in the audience singing to my songs. Fuck them. I don't want to. I'm not here for them, and I got to change this because I don't want to be like their band." And nobody thinks like that anymore. Look who replaced him, right? Korn and Limp Bizkit
Well,
and all these like, I mean, it
And
went
the
right
Foo
where the music
Fighters.
business
well,
wanted it to
I
go.
mean, the
did you
Foo
hear what
Fighters told me
Corgan
to
was
give it
saying
a shot.
recently? Billy Corgan's been out saying that like the
But
whole
that's
industry
the
changed
Smashing
right there.
Pumpkins guy, right? That
Yeah.
the Smashing Pumpkins guy?
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about when he was saying that they put hip hop in its place, and hey,
Yeah.
that's a great looking cat.
Yeah, that's
Um,
Mocha there, yeah.
and yeah, I don't know. I think it's not what it looked like from where I saw it. I love hip hop. I thought that hip hop was actually carrying on the revolution in a way that rock wasn't. Like rock had gotten, it was very similar to like what happened when Yes and Led Zeppelin and those bands got so pompous that punk rock had to happen. And I think that MTV made these hair bands so ridiculous that hip hop came along and was like, yeah, really, that's nice. Well, anyway, this is what reality's like.
So it didn't
And
feel
kids were
engineered
like, oh
to you?
wow, this is great, and then all of a sudden the bands felt like, hey man, like what happened? Nobody likes us anymore. Yeah, it's because you suck compared to like what NWA was doing at that time, or even Two Live Crew, like they were hilarious
And
and they were
it
taking
didn't seem
risks that bands
engineered?
weren't.
It didn't seem engineered to you at all back then?
I'll tell you where I saw engineering. Like I didn't see engineering in terms of like, let's switch this over to violent hip hop. What I saw was, um, and it's really horrible, and I really believe this is true. When we did a national tour, I think it was 98, somewhere in there, 98, 99, the all ages clubs that we played. So we were like a DIY Riot Girl band, and we were able to book the entire national tour just through our fans and through other bands. No business, right? Just everything was just so organic. It was so awesome. And there was all ages clubs all over the country that were like the minor leagues for baseball or something. They were places where the young bands could get started and play, and their friends from school could come see them. They could open for a bigger band, and those bands would graduate to be big bands. So like bands that started that way were Hole, Rage Against the Machine, Nirvana, bands like that. And we loved that scene because playing a club was a bummer. Like people are drinking, they're talking, they're shitty, they're trying to hit on each other. We'd be playing all ages shows, and the kids are asking you about your lyrics. They're giving you like a zine that they wrote, or they want you to hear their band. It was a completely different vibe. It was really beautiful. And what we saw happen was every all ages club we were playing that year was closing down.
No way.
And we kept asking the managers
What?
what's going on, and they all said the same thing, that their local fire marshals and city councils had suddenly decided to invoke laws that had been ignored for a long time, for many years. So you don't have enough parking spaces for the size of your venue. You need to have another bathroom. This isn't enough bathrooms for how many people come to your club. Like all these silly regulations that they'd never worried about before. And at the same time, Live Nation took over live concerts. And all of a sudden, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for younger bands. Like they were all pushed off into the festivals, and you couldn't really get a gig opening for a big band. And at the same time, the ticket prices and the t-shirt prices skyrocketed. We used to be like $5 for a ticket. You could go see a good band for $15. These days it's 100, 200, more. A t-shirt used to be like $10 maybe. And now the t-shirts are like really expensive. That's one thing that changed. And then at the same time, Clear Channel took over radio. And they didn't only take over commercial radio, they took over college radio. And they put these kind of different lists. It used to be DJs. I mean, when we were playing, things could happen like what happened to us, which was we released a record in 2001 called Tacoma Ballet, which was all freestyle. It was Patty Schemmel played drums on it from Hole, and DJs loved it. We were sending it to the radio stations ourselves, right? Like we didn't have a record company. And we was just like, hey, here's our new record. If you like it, play it. And we were number one. We came in above like the Breeders and Beck and all these huge artists, and because the DJs liked us. But Clear Channel made it impossible for the DJs to make their own choices. Suddenly the DJs were handed lists, and the lists were the same everywhere throughout the
Wow.
country, where it used to be
Really
that it reflected
centralized
your
it.
local interests, local
Wow.
bands.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that was deliberate. I
Yeah.
think that was a right-wing thing, that they realized how dangerous the rock world was, um, all the way throughout its history. People like John Lennon, people like Jim Morrison, people like Cobain. When Cobain did Rock for Choice shows, it was major news, and kids got into Rock for Choice, and they cared about issues that they didn't care about a few years earlier when they were holding up signs saying, at Motley Crue gigs saying, "Hey, Nikki, fuck my girlfriend." Like it was a completely different world. And I think that the business people realize, we don't want this. Like we want nice, compliant boys who, do what we tell them to do, and everything's the same everywhere, and we can maximize the money, make more money out of it, and then we're gonna just close it all off. And one other thing happened. The courts went after these young bands, and we used to get letters from these bands. It was tragic, man. Like, basically what was happening was you have a young band of, let's say they're 15, 16 years old. There's one I'm thinking of that was just amazing. They would do gigs on street corners in LA. They would just like tell people we're going to be at the corner of this and that. The drummer used big like water bottles, and for drums, and they would set up and like hundreds of kids would show up. They were a great band. They'd play until the cops came and chased them away. And then what happened was suddenly all the courts started to like, okay, you got caught um, skateboarding, you got caught graffitiing, things that 15-year-olds do. And now we order you to stay away from your bandmates until you're 18. And if you don't do it, you're going into juvie. And
Wow.
so these kids would write letters mostly to Tamara, and they would say, Tamara, what do I do? Like, these are my best friends. This is my band. I'm not allowed to even rehearse with them until I'm 18. It's 3 years. It's an eternity. Fuck, man. I mean, what is that? And all of it happens at once.
Yeah, that's weird.
Killed the whole thing. Killed the
Yeah.
whole thing. The
Cut
nice
your
thing is
knees
it's
out.
kind of coming back now. Like you were mentioning, Darren. I mean, there's a generation of young bands. Um, just to mention a few, there's a band out in Northern California, a punk band called Special Forces. That's great. There's a Seattle punk scene. There's a Riot Girl Forever group in LA. There's a fantastic hip hop duo called Neighborhood Kids that's coming out of LA. And they talk about what's going on in the world right now. And another good one is T2K. They're a bigger band, but they talk about a lot of these issues. And they have big audiences that are responding because they want people to talk about what's happening. They don't want just pop music. So that's hopeful, I think. And because of them, there's not like established all ages clubs, but there are places where kids can play again. Because our band for a while, we were all age shows only. And that was a rule. And then there was nowhere to play. I
Yeah.
mean, like there was literally nowhere to play. And we'd have to like play some rec center in a park, to be able to have an all ages show.
Crazy. Do you have a few more minutes or
Sure.
Yeah,
Darren?
we should jump back to the book, I guess, and dig into, well, you
Yeah.
mentioned the other book we didn't talk about yet too, right? So maybe we can plug that one on for a few minutes.
Sure. That's a whole nother thing. So, um, The Unobstructed Way is about Stuart Edward White and his wife Betty, who in the 30s and 40s wrote a series of books that were extremely famous, but now they're completely unknown. I mean, like totally unknown. And there's just something that we found when we were researching American metaphysical religion, and they were our favorite story. Not only as a couple did they lead the most amazing life. Like Stuart Edward White was, he'd been a gold miner, he'd been a frontiersman, he'd been a lumberjack. He was mapping out wilderness in Africa and in the Sierras when they were wilderness. And Teddy Roosevelt, who was his friend, said he was the best shot with a gun or a rifle he ever met. And he wrote westerns and books about the frontier, adventure stories. Many of them were made into films and was very successful. And at a certain point in their lives, when they were like in their 40s or so, they stumbled upon a party where a friend had a Ouija board and they were using it for fun. And the Ouija board started to spell out Betty's name. And she thought they were joking around, but she eventually came over, and then it's all it would say is, "Get a pencil, get a pencil, get a pencil." And eventually Betty got a pencil back home, and she started very slowly to do automatic writing, and she was blown away by it. And Stuart was like, "This is ridiculous. I don't believe in this stuff." But yet they were like, "Okay, we've explored the world. Let's explore this." And as they did, her her abilities deepened. She became a medium, and this was not mediumship a la Casey, or it wasn't stories about Atlantis or past lives or health readings. She didn't do readings for anybody. This was being trained to achieve consciousness of the after death state while you're still alive, and then share with people what it's like and how to achieve it for yourself. And this, I think, had to do with the fact that World War II was just about to start. And right before they had finished one of their most famous books, called Across the Unknown, and they were about to reveal that Betty was in fact Stuart's wife, which would have been a big deal to their readership. And after lifelong health, Betty suddenly got sick and she died. And Stuart was blown away by the experience, of course, but she managed to communicate with him in a way that made him realize that she was still with him. And so that became the last chapter of that book, where he described her death and then this return that he experienced of her. But that wasn't the end of it at all, because she came back in all this flurry of paranormal experiences. He started getting letters from all over the place about visitations from her, and he himself experienced amazing communication. Like, at one point, he was with a medium that they had been friends with, and he actually requested not to talk to Betty, because he felt like his faith was strong and he didn't want a bad reading to shake it. And he also didn't want to bother her. He said somebody who had that kind of training probably had important things to do, and he didn't want to be like, "Hey, I miss you." And but as soon as she went under, Betty showed up. And the first thing she did was she called him by a nickname that she never said to anybody but him, never in public, which was Stoot. And then he said she spent 2.5 hours, detail after detail after detail of their long married lives together, without one mistake. And it just blew him away. And then she spent another year just giving information
Wow.
that they wanted transmitted to the world, now that the world was at war. And so he was an amazing guy. He was so ethical. Like, people wanted him. These books were bestsellers. They couldn't keep them in print. I mean, they would have to reprint them every 2 months. And everybody was like, start an organization, be a guru. And he was like, no, 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 no. He said, everybody has to find their own way. The books stand for themselves. I'll help. I'll answer letters. I'm here, if people are grieving over their dead relatives who were killed in the war. I'll talk to them about what I know, but I'm not going to be anybody's teacher or start a group or anything like that. He was a really cool guy. And they also had such picturesque lives before she passed. Like, their idea of a vacation was, they lived in Santa Barbara for a long time, and they had a yacht, and they would get on the yacht, just the two of them with a cat, appropriately enough, and they would travel to Alaska. And that was when Alaska was wilderness, and they would camp out in Alaska for a month, and then they would get back on the yacht, and then they would come back to Santa Barbara. I mean, they just lived this, like, dreamy life. He had a yurt on the shores of Lake Tahoe where he would camp out and write his books, that kind of thing. So we were really moved by him, and he was a great conservationist. There's actually a grove of sequoia in California that are named after him. And the teaching blew us away. Tamara was told about this by a psychic that we knew when we were with Manly Hall in our early days, and she tried to read the books several times. She was dyslexic, but also they are hard to read. It's early 20th century writing, and it takes a long time to get to the point. People had a lot more time back then, and she couldn't stand it. And finally, she said to me, "Can you translate this into modern English for me? Because I want to know why this guy wanted me to read it." So I started to read the books, and they blew me away. And so we started doing research in, like, court records, newspaper records, just to find out about these people, because there was no information. There's, like, no pictures of them. And so the weird thing is we decided to do the book and we wanted to share this. We were like people should know about these guys and what they said. It changed our lives. Maybe it'll change other lives. And for Tamara, this was the most important project. She said it was dear to her heart. And we finished the book in summer of 2025, and we're about to do the final edit for the publisher. And Tamara, who had never been sick, I mean, barely ever had a cold in all our time together, had not seen a doctor in over 40 years for any reason, suddenly got sick. And it was incredibly fast, like 5 days at home of just declining. And and then I found her non-responsive on the 5th day, had to do CPR, and then they took her to the hospital. She died in the emergency room, but they brought her back.
Oh my
And
God.
then 5 days in the hospital, and they told me she was coming home. They said that there was no imminent danger and that her healing was almost miraculously rapid. And then there was a case of medical malpractice. They tested her for something and they punctured an organ. She started bleeding internally. They didn't know which organ it was. She was already weak from what she'd gone through, and she was gone. And so, um, it was so strange, that it happened in such a similar way to Betty. And they were very similar people. Both Betty and Tamara had an incredible way with animals. Both Betty and Tamara had an incredible way with plants. Like plants and animals flourished around them in an almost supernatural way. And
Wow.
they had such a communion with animals, just beautiful. If Betty was like Tamara, and I assume she was, it's because there was so much respect. Tamara treated animals like equals, like they deserved as much respect as you would give to a human being you're communicating with or living with,
Yeah.
and they responded. Also, both Betty and Tamara did not age normally. In the Betty books, they say that aging is a superstition and that we hypnotize each other into aging in a certain way. So all those snarky Hallmark birthday cards that tell you you're gonna lose your hair when you turn 30 and all that, and the way we all kind of do the same things together, now we go to school, now we have kids, now we that this hypnotizes us into experiencing aging in a way that isn't actually natural. And and supposedly Betty, um, well, obviously I don't know, but Storch said that she like never lost her brown hair color. She never got wrinkles or jowls. She seemed young her whole life, and that all their friends commented on it. And it was the same for Tamara. Tamara had blonde hair her whole life. She never got wrinkles or jowls. All our friends would say, "My God, she looks like a teenager." And I think my theory is it's because she never believed in aging, and her soul was so present in her life that I feel like it just kept her body young. And so it was devastating. Tamara and I lived an amazing life. We loved each other. Like, it wasn't like, most people are in love and then it's love. We
Yeah.
were in love, like falling in love every day, the whole time, infatuated with each other, having a blast and doing everything together, making documentary films, the band. She was the front woman. Um, she was a great guitar player, my favorite rhythm guitar player. She was a great writer and my editor. She was a martial artist. She was a painter. She was just this incredible person, just this total creativity, and also this compassionate presence in other people's lives. She had an uncanny ability. Like, you wouldn't talk to her for a year, maybe you interviewed her once or something, and then something horrible would happen in your life, and the next day there would be Tamara in your messages. "Hey, how you doing?" And she would lift you out of it. She would remind you, you're still alive, you've got talent, people care about you. Or she would just send messages to people who were struggling because they were creative and they were trying to make a way in the world. And she would write them at just the right moment and say, "Hey, we love you. Keep going. You're doing great. We're so proud of you." That kind of thing. And she directly mentored especially in Riot Girl, a whole bunch of young women in particular, but some men too, but mostly young women who went on to make movies, who went on to have bands, who went on to write books and get published, and she would connect them with people who could help them to achieve these things. And she was, so much fun to be around, so beautiful, made my life something magical, and without her, my life seems very, dark and bleak and empty. But like Betty, Tamara, within a week, started making herself known.
I was gonna ask.
And yeah, and I started getting
Holy.
messages. The first thing that happened to me was, after the first week when I was just completely devastated, my bass player moved in with me, Margaret, to watch me, and I could barely eat, I could barely sleep, I was just torn apart. A friend of mine said, "Well, it's like losing your arm," and I said, "No, it's like being an arm that lost its body." You know, that's the way it was. And I knew I had to deal with things like cremation and death certificates and lawyers, and I just didn't know how I was gonna do it. And on that Monday morning after the first week at dawn, I remembered something from the Betty books, which was this appreciation meditation. But I did it out loud. I just started talking to Tamara and telling her how much I love her and how what a great life and all the little things I loved about her, all the details, the things that we don't notice until they're gone, you know? And she I don't know how to describe it, man. I mean, I call it a soul fusion. Like it was like she crawled on top of me in a way, like spiritually. There was nothing but light. I didn't see anything else. I didn't see the room I was in. I got glimpses of her hair and of her shoulder, which maybe my own unconscious kind of furnished because recognizing her, I was always used to seeing her. So I might have manifested that experience. But it was her. And I would describe it as like, it was like a mutual orgasm that lasted like 20 minutes or something. Like it was unbelievable, ecstatic. But the most important thing about it was when it ended and I woke up kind of from it, like came to, I had this big smile on my face and I was like, I knew it was her. I just felt this bliss. And she had left me without saying a word, this perspective, which was Ronnie, ashes and cremation and death certificates, they're trivial. They don't mean anything. They're just the leftovers that you sweep up after the party. Like I'm here. I'm a living soul. And I remember I'm who I am. And that transmitted to me. And so I was able to take care of those details. But I still missed her physical presence. Just I still do, even now, terribly. And so a week later, I was getting these messages from people and it was really intense. Like three different people who didn't know each other and didn't know us very well, just social media, like basically fans of Tamara's, sent me the same exact message that they said Tamara had told them to tell me on the same day,
Wow.
and which was live up to what you know. And so and then I started getting more and more. People were seeing her, like Ike Baker. I don't know if you know him, but Ike Baker actually saw an apparition of her. Other people saw apparitions or heard her or had dream experiences where she relayed messages. Tell Ronnie this, or here's some advice for you, by the way, especially the girls that she had mentored. All got visitations from her where she was like, I'm still here. I'm still helping you. And and then I'll tell you this story, because it's funny and it's amazing, and it's so much her sense of humor. So, I was still pathetic, like, man, I miss her, like, I miss everything about her. I miss the way she'd be laughing, like, right now, I'd be hearing her laughing downstairs, playing with the cats and, making noise, and she was just so full of life, and I missed everything, just like, she used to like to lay on me, and she knew I loved this, and she would, like, flicker her blonde hair back into my face, and it was like heaven for me. I could smell her hair and the way she'd flick it with this kind of, "I know you love this." Like, I miss that so much. I miss making her coffee in the morning, and I would put it in front of her, and she'd go, "Yum." Like, hundreds of little things. And so I'm all brokenhearted and I say, pathetically, I go, "Tamara, please, like, show me a sign, like, do something, like, show me that you're still here." Well, the first thing that happened was that we had 2 cats that she picked out right before she left, and one of them was bonded to her, and this cat never came to anybody. Like, if I call this cat, it's like, "Whatever," but if Tamara called the cat, this cat would come. And so this cat suddenly perked up her ears and stiffened up and then looked into the kitchen and then ran in there like she was running to Tamara and ran right up to the chair that Tamara used to sit in the kitchen. So I thought, okay, maybe that's definitely weird. But right next to the chair was this 3.5 foot tall plastic fan. And Tamara used to use that fan day and night. Like if it was cold, she used it because the heater was stuffy and it would get the air going. She used it because she liked to smoke weed, and so it would get stinky in there. She used it because if it was hot, it was a way to cool down a little bit. And I had read a review about it that it was a fire hazard. And so I would tell her, "Damn, girl, like, don't leave this thing on all the time. Like, if you leave the room, turn it off because you're gonna burn down the house." And this became a point of contention between us because she refused to do that. And so she actually came up with a nickname for me as a result, which was Mildred. And she'd say to me, "Okay, Mildred," and then she wouldn't turn it off. And so I felt bad about that. Like Mildred was not a nickname that I relished. And I figure, all human beings have like a neurotic housefrau in them. It just takes the right circumstance to bring it out. And for me, it was the fan. So here I am asking for a sign, and the cat runs in the kitchen right next to the fan. And about 10 minutes later, the fan turns on by itself.
No way.
Now, first of all the things to do like that, right? Like that's so Tamara, so her sense of humor, and also I get the last word. And and then I checked, I was like, "Does it have a timer? No. Is it a loose plug? No. Could the cats have turned it on by bumping into it? No. There's no explanation for it. This thing turned on by itself." So the next day, I'm telling a friend of mine about it upstairs. I'm on the phone and he's into this stuff and he says, "Come on, Ronnie." He's like, "That's Tamara. Like, that's so Tamara." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I know. It really is. It's so her." And I walk downstairs, the fan is on again. This happened 9 times. It never happened randomly. It only happened, like, and maybe it'll happen now, when I was on a podcast talking about, like, I had to be talking about it, and then the fan would turn on. So 2 months after she passed or so, maybe 3, I got an email from someone that we hadn't known very well, someone associated with the Theosophical Society that was planning to interview her, and this person didn't know any details about our lives. We'd only had very minor contact on social media. And she said to me, "Ronnie, I'm not a medium. I'm not really into this psychic stuff, but Tamara has been communicating with me for a couple of months, and I've been taking notes. And I finally got up the courage to write you and to ask you, am I crazy or
Wow.
is this Tamara?" So there's a whole list of stuff, right? And there were many, many hits in it, many things where I was just like, "Holy shit." But there was one thing that just floored me, which was this sentence: "Tell Ronnie to tell Mildred that I
Oh
love
no.
her."
No way.
Yeah. Now, first of all, how do you get the name Mildred, man? That's just forget it. But then
That is
also the intent of it, that what that did for me, because when someone you love dies, you begin to collect regrets. You think of all the things you wish you had done, things you waited too long to do, things you wish you hadn't done. And Mildred was on my list. I was like, damn, I wish I hadn't bugged her about that stupid fan. Nothing ever happened, like that was so bad. And that message, Mildred, I love Mildred. It was so healing for me, like, that she was telling me, "No, no, I get it. I know why you love me, and you're trying to take care of me." That's just one example, and there are dozens. So that's where it's at with that. It doesn't change, um, you know I mean, even before I did the podcast today, I just felt like a lost soul, you know, it was a it's she was so meaningful to me. She made life it was almost like she was designed just for me. I can't describe it any way. Every single thing about her just made me happy. And even when we were fighting or we were like, I still just the way she was, her ethics and the way she expressed herself and her sense of humor, it just made my heart sing. And then her way with animals, like I feel bad about our cats, you know, like I always I tell them, you know, I'm like, oh, you poor things, you know, like you could have had Tamara and you got me. And it still weighs on you because the physical presence is something, man. Like
Oh
when you come
yeah,
home and there's somebody you love there and they see you
yeah,
and they go, "Hi," you know, like just little
yeah,
things like that.
yeah.
And and so I still live with that and I expect I always will. But there is no doubt this connection and I'll tell you another real short one that's funny. Like her birthday was in December, very near Christmas. And as a kid, she never got gifts for both. It was like, "No, no, no, you know, you get Christmas presents, that's it." And so I spoiled her whole life. I spent months getting together gifts for her birthday and for Christmas, and special gifts. And so when her birthday rolled around in '25, ooh, man, it was bad, man. It wasn't just grief. It was like the person that I was before I met her came back a little and the anger and you know when I met her I felt like I thought the world was a horrible place and I thought you know if a world could make a Tamara it's not so bad and but then it was yeah fuck the world took her from me like fuck what do I owe you world nothing you know like fuck you for doing that I got really angry and it kept going through Christmas, and it was, like, sad, angry, and it was just bad. On New Year's night, I dreamt about her, and she was sitting across from me, and she said, "How are you?" And I said, "Can you see the terrible pain that I'm in?" And she said, "Yeah." She said, "I've been watching you, and the show sucks." That was so her sense of humor, and, like and it I woke up laughing from that dream, and it changed how I started thinking, "Yeah, man, put on a show for Tamara, like, you know, don't be moping around all day and depressed, I mean, live up to what you know." That was the first message. Like, you know, so give Tamara a show, make the rest of your life something worth watching. And so that's just one example of the kind of things that have been happening around her. And the fact that the way it paralleled what happened with Betty is just beyond weird. And I don't know why or what it means or what the purpose behind all this is, but it feels like this was meant to be. And it's some kind of statement about what Betty was teaching. And I figure this that the thing about Betty is that Stuart and Betty were rich white people who it's hard to identify with them. And they spent 20 years working on this shit, like meditating and practicing. And so when they tell you you can do this, maybe, you know, like maybe if I had the time and the money in 20 years and the spirit's teaching me, maybe I could do it. But Tamara was a punk rock girl who didn't do any of that, and she did it. It's like an update, you know, hey, you can do this. This shit works. It's real. And it's something that every human being can experience. I love that your cat is hanging around on this, by the way. This is so and that's something that's happening all the time, like, whether it's a Zoom meeting or a podcast, if there's a cat or a dog in the room and I start talking about Tamara, they all come over and, like, get on the camera. It's very funny. So I think that maybe this was meant to show the reader that this is something that isn't just a peculiar moment that happened, a singularity, that this is a human legacy, that all of us can experience this state of consciousness. And Betty said that she believed that human beings would evolve to the point that having chats with people who had died would be normal, that
Right.
that's part of our consciousness, because there's a part of our consciousness that is still there with them,
Yeah.
right? That never came fully into the body. And so when we can wake that up, which is the purpose of every religion and esoteric system, really, then we can have that communication directly instead of through a medium or through dreams or that kind of thing.
Thanks for
And by the
sharing
way,
that, man.
one more thing, Carl
Yeah.
Jung was so impressed by Betty and what she achieved that he privately, not only did he give Betty books to his friends, but he said in a letter to one of his friends, Fritz Kunkel, that he considered it, he said it differently, but essentially what he said was that he considered Betty proof of the survival of consciousness after death.
Yeah, right. Wow. Well, thanks for
Wow.
sharing all that. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
appreciate
And
that. That is
especially the way it happened too. I mean, not just the timing, but the way it happened where she went sort of in and out already and then and then again that did she have anything to sorry to keep asking you questions here, but did you ever talk to her between when she first died
Yes.
and
Oh,
came
yeah.
back?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. She,
That's good.
it's very strange because the last night, when like I said, I thought she was coming home. They told me she'd be home in 2
Yeah.
days, 2 or 3 days. She called me at home and she said, "Bring the hymns of Orpheus with you," which she had written with me.
Yeah.
And she said, "I want you to sing them for me." So I was there. We were in the middle of this hospital. I was holding her hand and I was softly singing these hymns to her.
Wow.
And it's like somehow she knew or something, you know? It was
Yeah.
very strange. And also the last things that we said to each other were almost like somehow subconsciously we knew. Now I had no idea. Had I known, I would have spent the night with her. Like I didn't know. I was going home to feed the cats and try and get some sleep and to get the place ready for her. But she looked at me, those blue eyes were just glowing. I mean, it was amazing, and it's such earnestness. It breaks my heart. But she said we used to call each other meow. That was our term of endearment. And she looked at me and she said with all her heart, "I love you, meow." And I looked at her and I said something to her that I have said to her many times, which was, "You're my favorite person in the world. You're my reason for living, and you're the love of my life." And I said, "You'll be home soon." And those were the last things that we said to each other, which was beautiful. I mean, it was
Yeah.
amazing that we got
Yeah.
to say that, but the next morning I got a call from the hospital and they said, "You better get down here right now."
Wow. Wow.
yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that and being so candid. That can't be easy. Um,
No.
it almost seems trivial to ask now, but where can people get that book? What's it called? I mean, that obviously is probably more dear to you than any of the other books at this point.
Yeah, it's called The Unobstructed Way, and, the last chapter has 39 of her visitations, and you can buy it. The publisher says to buy it from, Amazon or, I think it's just books.org. Those are the 2 main, people carrying it right now.
Okay. We'll put links in the show notes to both of those.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ronnie. Wow, thanks. That got heavy at the end, but I appreciate that you shared that, and it's nice that you've got that sort of connection going to help you through this, and I hope that
Yeah.
keeps going on.
Yeah, I hope people. I'm putting it out there because I want people to have that hope and that experience for themselves too, so that it would be nice when it's such a thing that, we live in an impermanent world. To me, it's proof of the immortality of our source that we just can't, we don't act like it. We're never, all those years of evolution and we're not used to death. And then it hits you, and especially if it's someone you really love, and that can be an animal too. And you suddenly realize what that loss means. And I know
And that's
how
the one
agonizing
everyone
it is.
gets, right?
So
Nobody gets to skip that. Everyone gets that at
exactly.
some point.
So for if
But
anybody out there has had that experience, I hope, that book gives you ways to, and they're very wholesome, very simple ways that can help you to have that experience, can help you have that connection with somebody that you lost.
excellent. Ronnie Pontiac, this has been a great chat. We appreciate it. you mentioned the book. Is there any place else people can follow your work or track you down?
Yeah, I'm on Substack. I've got a Facebook, I've got an Instagram, and I've got a YouTube channel. You can hear some of the Unobstructed Universe teachings on my YouTube channel. It's all Ronnie Pontiac.
Excellent. Ronnie, thanks for taking some time out of your Saturday morning to chat with us. We appreciate it. And I hope everything keeps going, the connection and everything stays there with you and helps you get through all that.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
All right.
Always
Have a
nice to
great,
see you guys.
Thanks,
yeah,
buddy.
you too. Have a great
You
day
too.
and let's do this again. Let's do this
Yeah,
again soon.
definitely. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Now is a chat with Ronnie Pontiac, the Rosicrucian
Counterculture, yeah.
counterculture.
Yeah. And
Yes,
all the link to that in the show notes too. Like
Yeah,
simonandschuster.com where
we didn't spend as much time on that as the other stuff. But wow, what a great chat. Um, wow, caught me off guard there.
yeah. Oh yeah,
Caught me
me
off
too.
guard. But real big thanks to Ronnie for sharing that with us. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Support the show, grimerica.ca/support. Grab the book. I'll leave it at that. We love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.